After the last Spider-Man movie-based game seemed to be putting all of the right elements into place, one would think that a sequel would be able to take the positive aspects and drop all of the issues. However, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is quite the opposite. It instead takes all of the good aspects while failing to really improve on them, while adding a ton of new features that are completely pointless. The first issue is the story. Unlike the last game, which clearly made a point to focus on one villain and take place after the events of the film, this game isn't sure when the hell it's taking place or what is considered canon and what isn't. The game starts off with Peter hunting for his uncle's killer, which means that it's definitely after the first movie, and since this wasn't addressed in the sequel, I'm led to believe that this is happening in between movies. But then Harry Osborn and Max Dillon are here, so this must be happening parallel to the events of the sequel. Yet Gwen isn't in the game at all, since she and Peter are split up, so I'm back to thinking we're between films here. Only Harry becomes the Green Goblin by the end of the game, but he never kidnaps Gwen, and Gwen never dies. Also, Felicia Hardy is already the Black Cat, not Harry's assistant in Oscorp, and speaking of other villains at Oscorp, Smythe was in the movie, but he committed suicide after the credits in the first game, so is he still dead? And there was a Rhino cross species in the first game, but a guy in a mechanical rhino suit in the movie, but he's not in the game at all. God, I'm so confused. I mean, when are we? Where are we? I mean, is this a movie-based game or a game based on a movie influenced by a sequel, but not really? And then there's a cliffhanger at the end of the game with a character from the movie who died in the movie, but he's really the chameleon in the game, and that character might actually be in one of the upcoming spin-offs. And then Stan Lee's in the game, and he runs a comic book store which has Marvel Comics in it, like the real world, and yeah, I think my brain just melted. But putting all of that confusion aside, the game starts off with Peter hunting down his uncle's killer, and if the trailers for this game were any indication, this is supposed to be a big focus of the whole game's story, along with Kraven the Hunter helping Peter to hunt down the killer. So this is going to be great, an epic search to find the killer, Kraven giving out tips on tracking him down, and oh, look at that, the guy's dead already. What the hell? The developers went all out explaining that Peter's search for the killer was going to be a focus point of the story, and yet that part of the story is over before the damn tutorial's finished? I mean, when this happened, I actually thought I did something wrong in the previous mission and that this was a mistake. So now I guess the story is more about Peter searching for the man who killed his uncle's killer. Okay, which turns out to be Cletus Cassidy, because, you know, why the hell not? While this is going on, the Kingpin and Harry have teamed up to create a task force to clean up the streets of all crime. The main story then flips between Peter's search for Cassidy and trying to discover what the Kingpin is really up to. It's safe to say that the story is nowhere near engaging as it was in the last game. Also, why is this game so intent on bringing Carnage into the story, when Venom is nowhere in sight? I mean, I don't claim to know every different retelling of the Spider-Man comic lore, but I'm pretty sure that Venom is always introduced first and then Carnage. I mean, at least it was like that in the original comics, and the Ultimate series, and the 90s cartoon show. The narrative then includes moments with Electro and Green Goblin, if only to have them just because they were in the movie. At least the first game, the developers were able to include a fight with the Lizard without having to just shoehorn it into the plot. The combat is really just the same as it was in the first game. You just mash square a bunch of times and dodge and you're fine. I mean, there was no effort here whatsoever to try and make combat more dynamic. The game does introduce new types of webs, like a seismic web blast and a web shot that can eat through armor. However, you'll rarely use the seismic webs, and the game will automatically switch to the other webbing when you're locked onto armored enemies. This type of combat was fine in the first game, but you can't just copy and paste this type of a combat system again and expect it to work. Even the upgrade system is the same as the last game. It's like the developers didn't even bother trying to make combat better. I mean, if anything, the combat here feels more like it's on autopilot than it was in the last game. Stealth has received some new features, but it's not enough to totally fix it. The game now allows Spider-Man to drop from any point on the ceiling and scan the room now to see all of the enemies. However, the game never seems to let you stealth attack an enemy unless you're right up his ass. I mean, come on, I'm Spider-Man! I can web an enemy from any damn distance. Why do I have to be right behind him? A new feature to the game is the ability to play as Peter Parker. However, rather than letting you sneak around as Peter and use limited Spider-Man powers to make your way through an area, the game uses the Peter Parker segments mostly as an excuse to show off the new conversation tree window. Now, in certain cutscenes, you'll be given the option to ask 3 questions. However, it doesn't matter what you pick or the order in which you do so. It doesn't affect how the story plays out or how the conversation will continue. After you pick an option, the scene finishes and you'll be able to choose the other 2 remaining options. So basically, the dialogue tree is really just letting you choose the order of how the cutscenes will play out. And these segments are so boring. You learn nothing interesting, the scenes are slow, and it just stops the game's momentum dead in its tracks. Another pointless new feature is the Hero and Menace system, which the developers seem to be really proud of. As you play through the game, engaging in random crimes and succeeding will now make you heroic, and failing has you being labeled a menace. though most times actions that occur in the main story will force Spider-Man into being labeled a menace no matter what you choose to do. And when this happens, the task force ends up hunting you down and attacking you as you swing around the city. And if you try to fight back, which seems like the logical thing to do, you'll increase the menace bar. So it becomes an endless cycle of the game forcing you into the menace mode as you progress through the story, and as you attempt to get out of that mode, you'll end up being attacked by the task force, and trying to do anything about it makes the situation worse. But now, clearly, when you're a menace, the game has the task force attack you as a negative reward, so that must mean being heroic will net you something cool, right? Well, being heroic gets you two things: jack and shit. When you're heroic, you get nothing. Sure, the task force isn't up my ass, but where's the reward for being heroic? There's nothing. However, people on the ground level will cheer for Spider-Man when he's being heroic because, yeah, I'm playing a Spider-Man game and I want to choose to walk through the streets of Manhattan. I mean, that's like if Iron Man chose to take the subway to the battle with the Chitauri in the Avengers movie. Most of the side missions from the last game return, like stopping carjackers and taking down random criminals. There are some new ones like saving citizens from a burning building or getting rid of bombs placed around the city, but regardless, all of these side missions are now brought down by the stupid Daily Bugle announcements at the end of each mission. Whether you pass or fail, the game will always bring up this announcement, letting you know what you clearly already know, and there's no way to skip it until you're already watching more than half of it. It's such a time waster, and it serves no purpose. There are once again comics to collect all around the city, and once again they unlock real comics at the comic book store. New refinements are now given to the web swinging, but it's not all for the better. It's cool that you can now web swing by pressing either the left or right trigger to choose the direction Spidey will go, but it doesn't always work depending on where you are. You might be near a building on your right, but for whatever reason the game won't let you attach to it since you're not close enough. Also, when you're in areas with low buildings, web swinging becomes a big problem, as the webs will not always attach to where you wanted them to, leading you to get stuck in certain situations. Thankfully, the web rush mode returns, and it's just as cool as it was to use in the last game. The presentation is actually not as tight as it was in the last game, surprisingly. Some of the character models are alright, but others not so much. I mean, some look good, like Spider-Man's model and Kraven the Hunter, but Jesus! What the hell is wrong with Aunt May? Her face, her hair. God damn, woman, close your mouth, you're not even speaking! The graphics in the city are alright, and there's no problem when web swinging, but there's too many glitches around this time, like getting stuck in the walls, crawling into moldings around windows, and look at this! I'm climbing up the web, and look where Spider-Man's hand is! Come on, that's just laziness right there. The voice acting is alright again with no talent from the film being used, however, it's pretty sad that I have to say that the best voice actor this time around has to be Stan Lee. He seems to be the only one actually trying and giving a damn. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the perfect example of a lazy sequel. Instead of taking all of the positive aspects from the last game and improving on them, the developers chose to simply copy and paste and hope for the same result. This laziness added with the new mechanics that add nothing to the overall gameplay make the game worse than its predecessor. If you enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man, you're probably going to feel like this game wasn't as sharp as it could have been. Well, we've reached the most recent game in the Spider-Man video game franchise, but there's one more review left, and I'm going to keep it a surprise. So tune in next time to see what mystery Spider-Man game I chose to review as we conclude our Spider-Man review series.